Okay, now we're on to the video for imperialism. And again, this is a huge topic, so I'm going to divide this up into two different videos. First off, before we go any further, let's just quickly define imperialism. Imperialism is when a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation. A stronger nation dominates or gains control over a weaker nation. Please don't say a bigger nation takes over a smaller nation. That's not true. England is a very, very tiny country, and it ends up taking over India. India's huge. I mean, and India's not the last of it. It takes over, it has an empire that goes all over the world. But it's always a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation, all right? Now, the first thing we should do is explore why imperialism happens. All right, there's economic, political, social, and nationalistic kind of military reasons for it. The most important reasons to bear in mind, the two that they're going to focus on the most on the regions, is the economic and the social reasons. Probably third off is the political ones. But let's focus really on the economic and social. Make sure you know those two. The big economic reason is when you take over a place, you get their raw materials. All right? That's the easiest one, is that you want their raw materials, and in addition, you can force the country to buy your stuff. That's known as being a market. So remember, nationalism comes right after the Industrial Revolution, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Industrial revolution, industrialization leads to imperialism. These factories in these industrialized countries, these factories need raw materials. If they don't have cotton, they're not going to be able to produce textiles, right? They're not going to be able to manufacture goods if they don't have the raw materials, if they don't have the ingredients that they can turn into products. Their factories stop working. They're going to stop making money. So they need those raw materials. And sure, they might have some raw materials within their own country, but it's much cheaper and easier to get it from somewhere else. In addition, these factories produce so many goods. Remember, we talked about the fact that by mechanization, productivity goes up sky high. And sure, the people inside the country can buy some of those goods, but there's more, way more goods than all of the people inside the country can buy. They have even more to sell. And sure, they can sell those goods all over the world, but if you're just selling the goods, people might choose to buy it or they might not choose to buy it. When you have a colony, you don't give them a choice. They are buying your goods or else. There isn't even an or else. They're just buying your goods. They are forced to buy your goods. The only place they can buy certain goods are from you. They don't have a choice of who to buy from. That's why imperialism is so important. That's why imperialism and industrialization go together like peanut butter and jelly. It gives the factories a supply of raw materials and it creates a market. So when you think market, think supermarket. It's a place where you buy, okay? They become a place that's going to buy all of the goods produced by their factories. One of the other ones is also homes for growing population. That's not as big of a motive. We only see that really with France when it takes over parts of Africa, but really that's not as big, and also in some of the Scandinavian countries, but that's kind of an FYI. The two big ones are the raw materials and the goods. All right, we're going to go diagonal down to the social reasons. That's the other big one. That's this idea of social Darwinism. You should remember Charles Darwin. That name should sound familiar. Forget social studies. Charles Darwin should sound familiar from science class. Remember Charles Darwin? He was the guy who looked at the birds and their little beaks, and he started talking about survival of the fittest. Remember that? Natural selection, if that sounds familiar. This was the guy who said that there's evolution and certain, this is science class. You don't need to know this part for social studies, but in science class they talk about the fact that there are certain animals, and the animals are going to adapt to their environment, and the ones that are better able to adapt to the environment are going to survive, and they're going to thrive, and they're going to have more babies, and so on and so forth. And that this process of natural selection is a good thing. It means that the creatures that survive are the best and the strongest, and blah, blah, blah. All right, so Charles Darwin's great. Okay, I have no problem with Charles Darwin. Darwin's ideas are amazing. They're amazing in science class. Okay, they're amazing and they're great when they're applied to animals. The problem is that people took Charles Darwin's ideas and started applying them to human beings. That's where things get sticky. Okay, and that idea of taking Charles Darwin's ideas and applying them to human beings is known as social Darwinism. This is this idea that there are certain ethnic groups, there are certain people who are better than other people, that your success as a culture, your ability to industrialize, the fact that you have more advanced technology means that the people in your culture are better than other people, that you are a more advanced people than others, and that therefore you should be in control of others, that your culture is the better culture and therefore your culture should survive and your culture should thrive and the other cultures should be destroyed because they're weaker and the other people should be, that they are less than you. As you can imagine, very dangerous idea, all right? But that's the idea of social Darwinism, which is going to lead into this idea of white man's burden, that white men are superior to other cultures, that this white European, culture is the best culture and therefore they have a responsibility to spread their culture to other regions of the world, to other people. And this burden. Burden means responsibility. So like white people have a responsibility to spread their culture and their ideas to other cultures. And again, this idea of spreading Christianity, that the Christian God, this is the right religion, and therefore there's a responsibility to spread this religion to all the people in the world, and other religions need to be wiped out and, are not equal to, and that they should be disregarded, that there's a responsibility to spread the Christian message. All right, so those are the two biggest motivations for imperialism. We're going to take even a deeper look at those, at least the social one. The other ones are when you imperialize and take over another place, you can see under military and political, this allows you to have a place to park your boats, your navy. So you have bases all over the world. It gives you the power and security that comes from a global empire. And again, if you look at the bottom left, this idea of nationalism, this is kind of broad idea that, to show off how powerful you are, the best countries, the strongest nations have a global empire. That having a global empire shows off how important you are, that you're important on the world stage, you have this prestige, you have this power. It's, like how can I explain this? Like, you see like a rap star and it's like, oh, I'm covered in bling, I have lots of diamonds, What does diamonds have to do with your ability to rap? Nothing. However, if you're a great rapper, you have to be dressed like, whatever. So you're going to blind somebody with all your jewelry. You get what I'm saying? It's this idea that this shows off how powerful you are, shows off how, great you are, that you must be amazing because look at all your diamonds, right? You must be a great rap star. Same thing. Well, you're not going to cover a country in diamonds, but it's, oh, I'm a great, powerful, important country. Look at how big my empire is. Look how many countries are under my dominion. Look how many, this makes me a big player on the world stage. All right. So like I said, this idea of white man's burden, this is one of the most important cartoons. This one comes up a lot. And it's this kind of idea. Again, you can see this human being. This is this like white guy. He's got his little, cowboy hat on or whatever. And he is carrying a man. I don't know if you can tell. It is a horrible caricature. It's a racist caricature of an African person, all right? So it's every bad stereotype. He's in like the grass skirt, he's got big lips, he's got, the big hair, and he has him literally flung over his shoulder. So this is his face and his one arm, and you see him holding him by like his butt, and you see the other leg swinging over. And so he is basically dragging this guy. He's carrying this African person up the hill towards what? He's carrying it up to a schoolhouse. This is this idea, this is another one of this kind of idea of the white man's burden, that white people have this burden, have this responsibility to spread their culture. So they're going to educate the people that they conquer. They're educating and changing the culture of the people that they imperialize. White man's burden comes literally from this poem by Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, you may know him. His name may sound familiar because he also wrote The Jungle Book. So if you're a big Disney fan, you might remember him from that. But you can see this one. See, take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. When they say the best ye breed, that means like your best kids, your best offspring. Go bind your sons to exile. So that means like tell your kids that they have to go off to these foreign lands. To wait in heavy harness, so this is with this big responsibility, on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil, half child. So it's talking about you have this responsibility to take care of these wild people that are half devil and half child, that it's your responsibility, white people, to send your children, to send the people from your culture to go to these foreign lands and to care for these, native people or whatever, that they consider less than. There's some debate as to whether or not Rudyard Kipling meant this literally or if he was making fun of this idea, but nonetheless, this philosophy of white man's burden is very powerful, and it is one of the big motivations for imperialism, or at least certainly one of the justifications for it. All right, what does imperialism look like? The main and most common version is the second one, is the protectorate. But let's start at the beginning. Direct control, or sometimes we'll talk about this as being a colony. This is where a foreign government comes into a country and just takes over the whole place. The native people lose their land. They have zero voice in government. They have zero rights. The whole country is dominated by the foreign country. It forces the people to accept its culture, to accept its laws, to accept its rule, so on and so forth. Indirect control, or otherwise known as protectorate, if you become a protectorate, this is the most common because it's one of the reasons is it's much cheaper than running something under direct control. In indirect control, you leave the local people, the local leaders in place, but what happens is you basically force these leaders to follow your directions. So, for example, in India, Britain takes over India, right? And they leave these, they leave the leaders, they leave the, the governors, whatever, the local politicians, they leave them in place. They leave, a lot of ministers in place that are Indians, they leave them there. But, for certain local decisions, they're like, run it however you want. But however, when it came to business decisions, the British would jump in and say, for example, you can only buy from British factories, or you must grow this crop, or you must pass this particular law. In certain situations, the British would force their will, but in other kind of more local concerns, they're like, do whatever you want. All right. And again, the big piece was that the mother country, you're considered part of their empire. The mother country, the colonial power, the European power, is going to protect you and, make changes to your government. And we'll talk about some of those later. But anyway, the other one you need to know of is called the sphere of influence. This is actually kind of confusing to explain. So I think I'm going to table it. That means I'm going to put it off till later. What you need to know is that China is the one country that gets split into spheres of influence, okay? It's basically where you take a country and you divide it into sections, and these different sections, different countries get control of the different sections. And like I said, they're going to have these, and it's basically focused around trading privileges, because again, the economic motivations is the key reason why you're going to take over a country. Once we're going to talk about imperialism in China, and then I'm going to go more into what a sphere of influence is. But just know, if you hear the term spheres of influence, know that we're talking about imperialism, specifically imperialism in China. The last form of imperialism, I'm not sure if they'll get into it in the Regents. Again, the 2017 Regents is going to look a little different than other ones, so it's possible that they may get into topics that they haven't really looked at before. But the idea of economic imperialism is, this is what we're seeing more days. This is more kind of the modern day imperialism. This is where a foreign country doesn't necessarily get involved in the politics of a country. The only thing that they want to have involvement in is the business. So what happens is often the foreign government or even a foreign multinational corporation will lend the country a lot of money, and through this economic relationship we'll end up having a lot of pull and a lot of power over political decisions or over how the country is run. But the focus is really on an economic relationship, that they're going to have control over how businesses and how wealth is distributed in the country, and they're going to pull a lot of resources out of the country. All right. Okay, so we'll just kind of leave it at that. But the main thing, just know if you see the terms protectorate or spheres of influence, know that you're talking about imperialism. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm going to pick it up with part 2 in a separate video.